As the story goes, one night, right before the old farmer died, he burned his house and his stable down to the ground. It seems there were these two friends who were driving across the country, taking on odd jobs as they went along. They passed this old farmhouse with a sign out front, "Help Wanted." So the boys stopped and went up to the house and knocked on the door. The door slowly squeaked open, and there before them stood an old gray-haired farmer. He told the boys he would be more than happy to hire them. He and his wife could always use a little extra help around the farm. Then he mumbled something about how the last two boys he hired didn't stick around for very long. And with that, he told the boys to take their bags and go on down to the old guest house. That work starts mighty early around here. So the two boys did what the old farmer said. And though neither one mentioned it, they both wondered why the last two boys left so quickly. After a few days on the job, one of the boys noticed that his buddy was starting to look kind of tired and was acting a little strange. He began to wonder what was wrong. So he decided to ask him that very question. And this is how his friend answered. "I've been having this terrible nightmare ever since we arrived here, waking up in a cold sweat, trembling, almost out of breath." Then he continued to explain his dream. "First, I hear this hypnotic, eerie whistling sound, like someone is calling me. Then, I start walking through the woods, as if I were in some kind of a trance. The whistling keeps getting louder and louder and louder. And then she appears, an evil-looking old woman, all dressed in black. She motions for me to come closer. And when I do, she pulls an object out from behind her back. Without warning, she grabs my neck and pries open my jaw. I feel the taste of cold, hard metal in my mouth, and a sharp, stabbing pain in my sides. My heart is beating a mile a minute. After that, all I can remember is waking up terrified and exhausted. Needless to say, his friend was a little concerned about this nightmare. So that night, he decided not to go to sleep and to stay awake so he could see for himself what was really going on. Well, just around midnight, it started. That hypnotic, eerie whistling sound. And suddenly, his friend rose out of his bed and began walking towards the woods. He yelled out for him to stop, but it didn't do any good. He just kept on walking. So he started following his friend, being very careful not to get too close. Soon, they reached a clearing in the woods. And there, in the moonlight, he saw her, the old woman. She was dressed all in black, just like his friend had described. And then, without warning, from behind her back, she took out an old horse's bridle, uttered some evil curse, and forced the bridle into his friend's mouth. There was a blinding flash of light, and when he looked up, there stood a horse, right where his friend had been standing just moments ago. The old witch jumped onto the horse's back, kicked her heels deep into the animal's sides, and rode off wildly into the night. The boy who witnessed all of this was so terrified, he ran all the way back to the house, jumped into his bed, and with his heart pounding like thunder, he just waited and hoped his friend would return. Finally, several hours later, just before dawn, his friend stumbled through the door, pale and completely exhausted. The two boys looked at each other and in complete terror decided it was time to leave this evil place. So they gathered their belongings and started for the door. When all at once they both stopped, as if to read each other's minds. "We can't leave here this way," they said. "We've got to teach this old witch a lesson, one she'll never forget." So they sat back down and came up with a master plan. The next night, just like the night before, that hypnotic, eerie whistling sound began. But this time, they were prepared. They had stuffed cotton in their ears to protect themselves from the old witch's hypnotic curse. So they creeped through the woods and circled behind the clearing where the witch was standing. Then, sneaking up from behind, they both grabbed her. One held her while the other stuck the bridle into her mouth and yelled the same curse he had heard her speak the night before. And with that came the blinding flash of light. And when the boys looked up, there stood a horse where the witch had stood just moments before. But you see, the story doesn't end here. Oh no. These two boys had one more important part of their plan to carry out. They led the old nag down the road, back to the stable, and they took her inside and tied her up to the stall. Then they took down a hammer and they nailed horseshoes to all four hooves of that old witch horse. The horse began whining and shaking her head from side to side, trying hard to break free. Well, the boys didn't wait around to see what happened next. They grabbed their bags and jumped into their car and drove away as fast as they could, leaving a trail of dust behind them. The old farmer was still in bed when he heard that blood blood-curdling scream. He somehow knew the scream was coming from the stable. And that scream was unlike any sound he had ever heard before. It was like a horse's cry, turning into the sound of a woman screaming. He ran to the stable and flung open the door. And there, on the stable floor, lay the cursed bridle. And over in the far corner, in a pool of blood, lay the farmer's wife, writhing in agony, with horseshoes nailed to her hands and feet.
Happy haunting.